Blockbuster didn't die because it refused to change. It did change, and for a while, Blockbuster actually won. It built something that was beating Netflix at its own game, growing faster, scaring Netflix's own founder.
Blockbuster could have wiped us out many times. They saddled them with $1 billion of debt as their goodbye kiss. And that the covenants on that debt severely limited Blockbuster when they attacked us.
Then Blockbuster's own board tore that program apart, on purpose, in a fight over one executive's bonus. This isn't a story about a company too slow to see the future. It's a story about a company that saw it, built it, and then watched its own leadership destroy it from the inside, while the future was still winning. The laugh everyone remembers. You probably already know this part. In 2000, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph flew to Dallas and pitched Blockbuster's CEO, John Antioco, on a partnership. Netflix would run Blockbuster's online business, Blockbuster would keep the stores, and the whole thing would cost Blockbuster $50 million. Netflix had 300,000 subscribers and wasn't profitable. Blockbuster had 9,000 stores and $6 billion a year in revenue. Antioco turned them down. By most accounts, Blockbuster's team barely kept a straight face in the meeting. That story gets told at every business conference because it's a perfect punchline. Giant laughs off tiny startup destroys giant, roll credits. It's also, by itself, not what actually killed Blockbuster. Blockbuster had 6 more years after that meeting. And there was a second problem sitting quietly underneath the whole decade. In 2004, Blockbuster's parent company Viacom spun it off carrying $905 million in debt, taken on specifically to pay a dividend back to Viacom shareholders. That debt didn't build a single store or fund a single innovation. It just sat there, making every future decision more expensive than it needed to be. What Blockbuster did next, with the years it had left and the debt weighing it down, is the part of the story that usually gets left out. The comeback nobody talks about. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Blockbuster figured it out. Antioco spent roughly $200 million eliminating late fees, the single most hated feature of renting from Blockbuster. It was also the exact complaint that had pushed Hastings to start Netflix in the first place. On top of that, Antioco spent several $100 million more building an online arm called Blockbuster Online. In 2006, the two merged into something called Total Access. Rent online, return by mail, or drop it at any store, and walk out with your next movie the same day. It combined the one thing Netflix couldn't offer, a physical store on nearly every corner in America. With the convenience that made Netflix dangerous in the first place. It worked, and it worked fast. Total Access hit 2 million subscribers within about a year and a half, adding subscribers faster than Netflix itself was adding them. Netflix's stock dropped on the news. Reed Hastings later admitted he was scared of it, the founder of the company that eventually won this war, saying that out loud about a competitor, most people assume he crushed without breaking a sweat. Sit with that. The startup everyone assumes crushed Blockbuster from day one was, at one point, genuinely afraid Blockbuster was about to beat it at its own game. The bonus fight. This is where the story turns, and it has nothing to do with Netflix at all. Fixing Blockbuster wasn't cheap. All that spending on late fees and online infrastructure was cutting hard into short-term profits, and one investor didn't like what he was seeing. Carl Icahn was an activist investor, meaning he bought a stake in Blockbuster specifically to push the company to change how it was run. He built up his position and started pushing back, arguing. The spending was reckless. The fight escalated into something almost absurdly small for what was at stake. A dispute over Antioco's bonus. Icahn used it as leverage. In 2007, with the board's confidence gone, Antioco walked away. reportedly with an exit package worth around $9 million. He gave a chunk of the bonus itself to charity on his way out. A fight over one man's paycheck ended the one strategy that was actually beating Netflix. The man who built the only thing that had ever made Netflix nervous left the building with a severance check, while the program he built was still growing. Here's the detail that makes this genuinely painful. Years later, Carl Icahn himself admitted he wasn't sure the fight had been worth it. He later wrote that he still didn't know what would have happened if the blow-up over Antioco's bonus had never occurred and Total Access had simply kept growing, and that things might have turned out very differently. The activist investor who helped end the one strategy that was actually working spent the years afterward wondering on the record whether he'd made a mistake. The undo. His replacement was Jim Keyes, an executive who'd spent his career running 7-Eleven, not building technology or fighting off a streaming disruptor. Keyes didn't tweak Total Access. He gutted it, slashing its marketing budget, raising prices for online subscribers, and steering the company's money and attention back toward physical stores, the part of the business he actually understood. The subscriber growth that had genuinely rattled Netflix stalled almost immediately. By 2008, Netflix had passed 8 million subscribers. Redbox, a company renting DVDs out of dollar-a-night vending kiosks in grocery stores, had over 12,000 locations nationwide. Keyes told an interviewer that neither company was even on his radar as competition. 2 years before Blockbuster's bankruptcy, the man running the company said out loud that the two companies actively killing his industry weren't threats worth worrying about. In 2010, on the way down, Blockbuster brought back the late fees it had spent $200 million killing. The empire that fits in one store. The 2008 financial crisis hit right as Blockbuster's debt came due, and there was no more room to maneuver. In September 2010, Blockbuster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with roughly $1 billion in debt. Dish Network picked up what remained for a fraction of that a year later. By 2014, the last corporate-owned stores were gone. Was it really the bonus fight? Here's a fair objection. Maybe none of this mattered, because the $905 million in debt from the 2004 spin-off was always going to sink Blockbuster eventually. Boardroom fight or not. There's something to that. Debt that heavy makes every subsequent decision harder to survive. But it doesn't explain the timing. Total Access was working while that debt existed. The company was closing the gap on Netflix with the debt already on the books. The debt made Blockbuster fragile. The boardroom fight is what actually broke it. Today, exactly one Blockbuster store still operates in the entire world. A franchise location in Bend, Oregon, kept alive mostly as a nostalgia attraction. Netflix, the company Blockbuster once had genuinely scared, now has over 270 million subscribers worldwide and is worth well over $250 billion. Once, Blockbuster had 9,000 stores and beat Netflix at Netflix's own game for a stretch. Now it fits inside a single building people visit to take pictures. The lesson. The version of this story everyone already knows, dumb executives laughed off a $50 million deal, makes it sound like Blockbuster's failure was a failure of imagination. It wasn't. Blockbuster imagined the future just fine. It built the future. For a moment, it was winning the future, faster than the company that eventually inherited it. What killed Blockbuster wasn't a failure to see where things were going. It was a company that built the right answer and then let an internal power struggle over money, over ego, over one man's bonus, undo it before it could finish the job. The threat from outside the building didn't get them. The fight inside the building did. Here's the uncomfortable question worth asking about any organization, including your own. What happens when the thing that's actually working is also expensive, unpopular inside the company, or tied to one person's job? Blockbuster proves the answer isn't obvious. Sometimes the thing that's winning gets killed by the people who are supposed to be protecting it. And the outside competitor just has to wait. Next time, a company that wasn't killed by a competitor or a recession or a missed deal. It was killed by its own CEO's theory about how people inside a company should treat each other. Subscribe if you want to see the pattern before it repeats.